Well, with the changes in our economy this past decade, it is the middle class most often pinched by everything from the rising cost of healthcare and higher education to simple job uncertainty, which is where our first guest today says we should focus our attention when we talk about income inequality. David Azerrad is with the Conservative Heritage Foundation. Well, David, when it comes to income inequality, there's a feeling out there that in a just system, we really shouldn't see this great disparity between incomes. But in listening to your talk, you say it's not the worry that a lot of people paint it to be. Why is that?
What the American dream promises is economic mobility, movement up and down the economic ladder, fortunes being made, fortunes being lost, people starting off poor, making it to middle class, people moving from middle class to upper class. What income inequality looks at is the static distribution of income at the end of the day. It tells you nothing about the opportunities that are available for people, whether or not they are moving up and down the economic ladder. So to me, if you care about what really matters, which is, can you still make it today in America if you work hard? Income inequality has nothing to do with that. I think what is ultimately fueling it is either a misunderstanding as to how economics functions, that thinking that it's a zero-sum game, that if the rich are getting richer, they've done so at the expense of the poor, which is not the case. Or oftentimes it's something uglier called envy, that you see this growing resentment against the wealthy. And I would argue that's not the way we look at the wealthy in America. In America, when we see someone who's made it, we think, by God, if I work hard, I'm going to get there too.
Now, you mentioned the zero-sum game, and what you're saying is that economics is much more dynamic than there is just this amount of money and how we divide it up?
If I had a magic wand and I could correct one economic fallacy in the world, it would be this notion that economics is a zero-sum game, that there's only one pie to go around, and that if I get a large slice, you're left with crumbs. That is fundamentally mistaken. The rich don't get rich at the expense of the poor. What you have in a free market economy such as ours is a system that allows you to grow the pie, to expand it as much as you want in order to serve everyone. So if people are getting wealthy in a free market system, it's not because they're defrauding the rest of us. It's because they're generating wealth. They're creating wealth. And in so doing, they also create opportunities that the rest of us benefit from. There are more jobs, higher wages, so on and so forth. So we really need to move away from this static view of one pie and how do we divide it up to a proper understanding of free market economics, which is how do we keep on growing the pie?
Is there a concern on your part, and I'll borrow a phrase, crony capitalism, where being pro-business means being pro-big business?
I'm not particularly crazy about the sentence pro-business. I think as conservatives, what we need to be is pro-free markets. Free markets benefit everybody. I'm fine with pro-business so long as we're clear that it includes all businesses, from the smallest mom and pop shop to the biggest oil conglomerate. What you often tend to see is that businesses are actually not pro-business. They're pro their own business, and they're in favor of regulations and laws that push out the competition. So I think this is a winning message for conservatives, and it's something, it extends well beyond conservatives actually, is we need to hammer away at this point, that we stand for free markets, and that means healthy competition and open opportunities for everybody. We need to be very mindful of crony capitalism, of corporate welfare, when big entrenched business interests hijack the legislative and regulatory apparatus to keep out their competition. That is unfair, and it's a profound distortion of what capitalism and free markets are about.
Let's talk a little bit about the American dream and really the American family and the disintegration that we've seen over the past couple of decades of the American family.
In 1970, about 10% of American kids were born out of wedlock. Today, that number, 40 years later, has shot up to 40%. Now, social conservatives and religious conservatives are rightly concerned about the collapse of the family, as they should be. My message is everybody should be concerned about that because it's not strictly a religious issue. It's not strictly a social issue. The health of the family is an economic issue. Why? because it's deeply intertwined with upward mobility. If you look at any indicator, lifetime earnings, high school graduation rates, college attendance, kids who grow up in intact families fare better than kids who either are born out of wedlock or have broken homes. The data is absolutely clear on this one. So I want to remind people that the family is not strictly a social issue. It is not strictly a religious issue. If you care about the American dream, it's an economic issue that is deeply intertwined with mobility.
You know, that really leads to another issue that you've talked about, and that's the erosion of the work culture that we've had here in the United States that's really propelled us forward over, decades. But is that not just an issue of maybe the disadvantaged, but also issues of the overly advantaged?
Meaning
that trust fund babies that sit on their butts. You know what I'm saying?
Well, look, in any free system, you're going to have the accumulation of wealth, and you'll have people who are born into a lot of wealth and don't need to work. In the long run, this tends to not be sustainable because this wealth is dilapidated, and you need to build it up. So, to me, I don't. There's nothing unfair about inheriting a lot of money and not doing anything and just spending it. And maybe that's not how I would choose to lead my life, or that's not how I'd want my kids to lead their lives, but it's not unfair. The problem I see is the cultural indicators we're sending in movies, in television, in books, in newspapers, that work, if you'll pardon my French, kind of sucks, and that going to the office every day is really for suckers, and that it's okay to just lounge around with your friends. I think that's a very, very bad message to be sending to people. We need to have a culture that is robust when it comes to work, that encourages, extols, and honors hard work, and we need to have a corollary sense of shame with people who don't work. If we don't have that today as much as we once did, I don't think it's the result of some trust fund babies not working as hard as they do. I would point the finger much more at Hollywood and the corrosive message they send in the movies, the sitcoms, where all these grown men are depicted who aren't really working. And it legitimizes indolence, and the people who are most in need of sound cultural indicators are the poor. And we're doing a profound disservice to these people and to the country as a whole by legitimizing such behavior. I really think when it comes to work, we should speak in one unified voice and make it clear that America is the land of labor. This is where you come. It's a country where you work. Benjamin Franklin was once sent a letter by a European aristocrat who wanted to immigrate to the US. And he said, "Can you tell me about this country?" And Franklin summed it up this way. He said, "America is the land of labor." People here work hard, and they extol work, and they view with shame the notion of not working or living off of handouts.
A final question about income inequality. You say we should focus less on that top 1% and more on the bottom 5 to 10%. Explain yourself.
When I was a kid, my father would always tell me that if you look into someone else's plate, it's to make sure whether or not they have enough to eat, not to see whether they have more than you. I think this should be the guiding principle. If we're going to look at how much other Americans are earning, it's not to be envious of their success. It's not to complain about how they've made it. It's to make sure that everyone has enough, both in terms of what is it like to be poor in America, in terms of absolute material conditions on the ground, and second, what are the opportunities that are available? If you are born into the poorest families in America, do you still have the opportunities to move up, or are you trapped in a failing school system? So I think whenever I hear someone complaining about the top 1%, my answer is, I don't care about the top 1%. I want to know how the bottom 1% are doing. I want to know how the bottom 5% are doing, how they're doing both in terms of the quality of their life and in terms of the opportunities that are available for them to move out of the bottom 1% and make it into the top 10, 20, 30, or you name it.
David Azerrad, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.